Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a wrap up specifically for the new releases that came out in January. For the anticipated releases that I had for this month, there were 5 that I ended up picking up, but only 3 that I ended up completing because 2 of them did end up being DNFs. That's one of the difficult things about checking out new releases is that there really isn't a lot out there for you to figure out ahead of time if it's really going to be the book for you. I'm going to start with those 2 DNFs and then I'll go into the ones that I completed. So first, we have the Ivory Key. This one I thought had a fantastic premise. It follows different siblings who have been kind of split apart due to various different circumstances, but now it would seem they all need to come together. There's this murder that happens at the very beginning of the book, and it's a very significant one because the person that was killed is the betrothed to one of our main characters, and it's really important that this person is married to this individual because since they have taken power, they have had not a very strong amount of hold on their kingdom, and they really needed this alliance, and now obviously it's fallen through. And so that's the very opening, and that's a fantastic opening, I think. And also just all of the siblings from the amount that I read seem to have very distinct voices. That said, the reason I DNF'd it is that the writing style seemed very much on the younger end of young adult. And I think that's just one of the challenges with young adult. It's such a broad age range, 12 to 18. A 12-year-old and an 18-year-old are very different people. And obviously you have some people that are coming into young adult that are actually younger than that. And then of course you have people who are reading young adult that are much older than 18, myself included. So every now and then you're just going to find some that don't quite end up being, you're not the target audience for it. And so that was the case with this one. Still, just from the little I read, I would definitely recommend it if you are somebody who likes the younger side of young adult or maybe middle grade. I think this is going to be a great one for people coming out of middle grade into young adult. Also, I just want to say the setting and the magic seemed very fascinating. So that's a big plus as well. But the other one that I DNF'd, I sadly cannot say very much about it because I feel so bad. I don't think I've ever DNF'd a book quite so fast. And it's just, I'm perhaps once again not the target audience for it. I discovered very quickly within the first couple of pages. And I just want to say, I know some of you watch my videos with your kiddos, and I'm going to post some screenshots that have some very adult content. So just that heads up. But with these screenshots that I'll share, they kind of indicate that, I think one of the main characters is supposed to be kind of disgusting and not really a character that you particularly like. I just didn't want to be in that character's head. And I was like, I don't know if this is for me. So I think it's just not for me. I will have it linked in case the premise is something that you find interesting. So the setup from what I'd gathered from the synopsis was that there has been this person that has been murdered, and I think it's the king, and they have blamed it on this one individual, I believe the one that's been introduced at the very beginning. They think it's their fault. And then there are 2 other perspectives, one of which is the actual assassin, and then a third perspective. So I thought the setup sounded really good. That's why I was interested in reading it. I just, once again, for both these books, I don't know that I was exactly the target audience. Switching now, though, to the books that I did complete, all of which I enjoyed, although varying different levels. One of them it was so good. Oh my gosh, I'm doing a whole in-depth review for it. Anyways, we have Daughter of the Moon Goddess, The Red Palace, and Engines of Empire. I will save Engines of Empire for last because that is the one that I was like, are you kidding me with this book? It's so good. So I'll start with Daughter of the Moon Goddess. I had thought that this was young adult, mainly because the author who did the blurb at the top is Stephanie Garber, and typically when you see those blurbs, they are authors that are within that same age range, but since having come out, it would seem it's adult fantasy, and I think that it can be read by either. It's one of those stories that there's nothing in it necessarily that, not that adult and young adult is only determined by explicit content, but there wasn't anything that I would think is, oh no, just super inappropriate or anything like that for a younger reader. I could see this being either or. And also, I would say with the type of story it was and the kind of character and the writing style, I thought it was one of those that you get the point. It could be in either. We follow a character who she has been isolated her whole life to where her mother and her mother's servant, we'll say, have lived. And her mother is the moon goddess. And there's all these stories about how her mother became the moon goddess, how she was able to ascend to immortality. And when you find out the real story, it's actually really, really tragic. And our main character, her entire existence has been kept secret from some people that are even more significant and important than her own mother, despite the fact that her mother is a goddess. Our main character then is very much in danger if her existence is discovered. Not only is she in danger, but her mother as well. And after everything her mother's been through, which I don't want to spoil how she got to be where she is, after everything her mother's been through, you really feel for her and you really want her to be freed from this isolation. It's actually really sad. And so our main character is driven to help her mother, save her mother, and then also herself. And this kind of lands her among a bunch of other immortals. She has to become a member of their society, but to do so means that she kind of has to start at the bottom and then work her way up. She does end up finding some allies along the way. There is some love story aspects to this, although it's not the absolute main focus. The main driving focus is for our main character to do what she can to free her mother. It's not as simple, though, as just trying to gain favor with someone, because there are magical aspects that are keeping her mother in place. And I felt very much for her mother and that connection she has with her. I thought that that was the main motivation for me to turn the page. It was that mother-daughter bond, even though you really don't see them interact all that much, just that love between a daughter and her mother. And I did like some of the other characters. There were aspects of the story that I definitely think felt very fantastical. It felt like I was reading a fairy tale, which I really liked, and it just feels very magical. The magic is quite soft, but it feels like, it very much feels like you're being told a story. That said, I do think that there were some aspects of this that felt kind of familiar and followed some arcs that I've sort of become familiarized in reading a lot of fantasy. I still enjoyed it, and if there eventually is a sequel, I will probably pick the sequel up. And I'm hoping to do a collaboration with Jessie from the channel Jessie May for a patron live show if you'd like to see spoiler thoughts about this one. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's an absolute new favorite, but I would definitely check out more by this author. If she writes a sequel, I will likely pick that one up as well. Next up, we have Red Palace. This is my first book by this author, and it is a historical fiction murder mystery. It was one of my only books, I believe, for the first couple of months that it was an anticipated release that wasn't fantasy. And I had a really good time with this one. So at the very beginning of the story, we find this gruesome murder scene, and our main character is a nurse, and she's managed to kind of pick herself up from not the best of circumstances to get herself to this point. She's pushed through a lot to get here, and she has a lot going on with her own family that I wasn't exactly expecting to dive into in the story, but it ended up being one of my favorite parts of the story, was just how much adversity she's had to overcome. But regardless, the murder mystery is, of course, the kind of main focus of the book. And our main character, I really liked, and her relationship with one other individual who she is trying to solve this murder with, I really liked their relationship. There's so much more to this investigation that puts obstacles in their way. So, for example, there's some blame being placed on a royal, and in doing that, they want the investigation to shut down as soon as possible and to also find someone else to just take the blame right away. Because if it gets too far and if too many people start to believe that it was this noble person, that could mean some pretty difficult things for that person and that person's child in taking the throne later on. And so there's so many little details. There's also, because it's historical fiction, so many times I would read something like, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. And I felt like I was learning. So for example, there's a lot of different rules when it comes to who can touch the bodies of the dead, depending on the person's gender. There's also rules involving curfew. So the women, it wasn't illegal for them to be out past curfew. It's only really for the men, but that plays a role in when you're questioning people, why was somebody out when they were? And then, of course, there are all these noble people that have their own plots going on, and they have so much power over I'm going to say the common man or the common woman. And our main character is obviously not somebody of a prestigious title. And so she's kind of caught trying to sort of be a spy for some people while also trying to go against that to help the investigation. And the person who's trying to solve the investigation alongside her also has pressure to not be looking into it. And there's just so much more to it than I was expecting. And like I said, I really liked the family dynamics, and the relationship between the characters was great. It's pretty short. I was surprised that we got so much in such a short amount of time. I don't read a lot of historical fiction murder mysteries, but I really liked this one, and I definitely want to check out more by this author. All right, now time for Engines of Empire. If I can, I'm also going to try to set up a chat with a couple of my friends for this one. One of them has already read it. One of them hasn't read it just yet, but I would love to do that. And similar to what I said about Daughter of the Moon Goddess, do a patron live show where we can get into spoilers. And oh man, do I want to get into spoilers about this book. There were so many moments I was like, what? And it was great. So I said I'm going to do also a non-spoiler but more in-depth review for this one. So if you want to hear more about it, be on the lookout. I'm going to try to keep my thoughts brief and succinct here, but I've been describing this as Final Fantasy 12 specifically meets Game of Thrones. And I really stand by that. The technological advancements in this particular fantasy society is why I kind of tie it a little bit to Final Fantasy 12. You have these things that are airships, and there's advancements in technology that have made the setting one that I would say is further progressed than most fantasy settings. The various different guilds are the ones that run society, at least in this particular area, but you see the world opening up through our different main characters, of which there are 5. You could argue there's 4 main characters and then a 5th one that gets a perspective later. So it is a multiple point of view story. All of our characters I thought were appropriately flawed, and they felt very realistic. They felt like they had their own personalities without the author overdoing it and going to the extreme to be like, this is the funny one, this is the smart one. It didn't really feel like that. They felt like they had a lot of depth. And that's a hard thing to do when you have that many perspectives and you also have a very large fantasy world to establish. This book had so many moments where I kind of wish, this sounds really self-centered, but I kind of wish I had a recording of my face as I was reading the book or listening to the audiobook, because I did go back and forth for the amount of times I was like, what? Or just like, oh, no. And I just had so many reactions. And I don't even think it's because I was being dramatic. I think it's because there's so many awesome things that happen in this book, or so many things that catch you off guard. And the foreshadowing is so good. It's the kind of foreshadowing where you don't realize it's a foreshadowing until something happens. And you're like, that was not just a random world building detail. You were 100% setting up this thing for later. And the amount of times that he would do it. And I was like, oh man, okay, you got me. As soon as I finished this book, I was like, what else has he written? And I went to my local used bookstore and I bought another book by him. That was the only one they had. And thankfully it was book 1 in a series. I don't even know what it's about, and I don't care because I loved this so much. I am so excited for when we eventually get sequels to this, because if the new installments are as strong as this first one, this is going to be a new favorite for me. I loved this first book so much. It did take me a while to get through, because the world is quite large and there's a lot to take in, but I feel that the pacing definitely always allowed for me to process everything in a good amount of time. I never felt like I was completely clueless, and I don't think it was difficult to understand what was going on. It just took time to be introduced to everything. There's definitely tension between the old ways and the new ways, and you have this society that used to run a lot on faith and religion, and that has it's still a part of society, but it's not nearly as strong of a part as the guilds and these technological advancements, because this is what is making society progress, and therefore that is what is helping individuals live better, we'll say. And so you have this little bit, the old versus the new ways, this turning of the century type of feel, and you have someone from another country that comes as an emissary to discuss a peace treaty, and then the story kind of goes from there, although there's so much more to the story than that, and you start to learn more about the one society that is run by the guilds, while also starting to learn more about these other lands and how this particular area has affected these others. There's definitely themes of colonialism, and that truly just scratches the surface. It doesn't really, I know, tell you very much, but it's fantastic. You do have a story where this is going to be something I think a lot of people won't love, but it didn't really bother me. Our main characters, 3 of them are siblings. One of the characters is their mother, and then the other character I don't want to say too much about because I don't want to reveal too much. But those characters are all kind of in different places. And I know a lot of people want their main cast to be together or come together, and you don't quite get that. Typically, I would fall under the camp of I prefer when they're together, and maybe every now and then they're apart, but they're usually together, or you feel like their worlds are going to collide. It's interesting to have a family where they're split apart, but I feel like the family ties were present even when they weren't literally together. And I also felt that the characters, their plot lines were always so intriguing, and there were aspects of all of their plot lines that related to each other, that it didn't really feel split apart. I don't know if anything I have said has piqued anybody's interest, but I will be doing that in-depth non-spoiler review where I go way more into various aspects of this book in case you're still on the fence, you're not sure. But if you tend to have similar tastes to me, I would say you should go for it. And if sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, maybe wait for that review. But I thought it was so good. I really, really, really enjoyed this. I can't wait for the next one. And just like I said, so many moments, so many times that it was great. I'll just stop and end it on that. That's it for the new releases I got around to in January. Definitely let me know if you are interested in picking any of these up. If you've read them yourselves, let me know your thoughts on them. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.